Chat with them about them later. The list goes on and on. So please, let's get started. Here's Boon to deliver his talk, Rules, Hunches, and Coinflips.
Okay. Hello. And now we do the magic. We do the wiggle. Have a little bit of a Zen moment. Oh, let's log in. Is that part in every conference where it's like, and now we do this. Wait. Let's see if we got it. Awesome. Good morning. This is great. What I love about UX conferences is there's always a space here near the laptop. And there's all this space over here that no one will use for the rest of the day. This is far more space than needed for my purposes. It's great because I get to come over here and I go, there's no one sitting here, so that... Okay, let's try that again. Good morning, my name is Boon Sheridan. Can you hear me okay? All right, if you can hear me in the back, say monkey. You said monkey. So that's about all I'm going to require from you today. There's no quiz, there's no calisthenics, no standing up, no sitting down, no fight, anything like that. My name is Boon Sheridan. This is where you can find me on Twitter most of the time. I love all the UX conferences that have exploded in the last few years because it tells me so much about where UX and design is going. I was at Canucks, which is a user experience conference in Ottawa last year, and I loved something Jess McMullen said to everyone. He said, you know why we're all here? Because we won. We've made people understand design is important, user experience is important. All the things that early in my career, you had to fight for every inch to get people to understand. Why do we need a taxonomy? Well, have you looked at the email queue lately? Yeah, there's 400 people that say they can't find anything on the site, but that doesn't mean we need a taxonomy. I want to do interaction design. We don't need interaction design. Well, have you realized that everyone hits a form and they just don't know what to do? Bit by bit, we've taken what we do and turned it into something that our friends and our partners work with. Now, I love user experience, but because we're here to talk about the internet, I'm here to start with a story about a cat. Because the internet is made of cats as far as I can tell. This is Cash and my brother. It's a very old photo, but clearly you can tell who the handsome one is in the family. When I was growing up, Cash was our favorite cat. She was everything to the family. She was mother confessor. She was the source of all our comfort, all our joy. The reason we freaked out in the morning because you'd find a dead animal on the front. You know, you wake up and there's a cat sitting there going, got you a present. And you're like, you should have wrapped it. I moved away when I was in my 20s, and I kept in touch with my dad all the time. And one of the things my dad told me on a call was, Cash is getting into her late teens, and I think she's going deaf. And I said, cat going deaf, okay. How can you really tell if a cat's going deaf? And he said, well, she'll be surprised when I come into the room. I'm like, okay, that describes every activity a cat does at any time. I'm still not getting it. And he said, well, there's times we think she's deaf. So I talked to the vet, and I said, you know, we're not sure. And he goes, oh, well, the next time you bring her in for her checkup, we'll give the cat a hearing test. And my dad was so excited. Like, you give a cat a hearing test? How do you do this? And this was in the late 90s, so it wasn't quite as easy to do research. And my dad said, okay. I started to look up what I could. I talked to some friends, and I found out that you actually can give hearing tests to animals. And what he found out is there's hearing tests, and it's often for some reason given to horses. I think because they have the biggest ears, that they can put sensors on an animal's ears and muscular reaction to see if they hear the sounds. And my dad was going, this is amazing. How are we going to do this? How are you going to get it? You can't get a cat to hold still for 5 minutes, let alone to put electrodes on its ears and do tests. So my dad was so excited, and it came time to bring the cat in for its exam. Dad comes in with the carrier. He's been telling everyone about the hearing test. Now your dad has a story, and he can't wait to tell everybody. Puts the cat down. Vet does the test. And he spends a few minutes going through everything he needs to. And he's getting up to the end, and my dad goes, oh, we were going to do the hearing test. And Vet said, oh, yes, right. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to stand here in front of the cat, look the cat right in the eyes. And then I'm going to go do the hearing test. And my dad went, okay, Cash. I know this hasn't been a great trip. We had the whole temperature thing, so this is going to be easy, I promise you. And the vet walked up behind the cat and said to my dad, are you looking at the cat? Yes. Okay, I'm going to do the hearing test. Your cat's deaf. That'll be $75. And the doctor looked at my dad, and my dad's face must have fallen because, oh, you expected something much fancier, didn't you? And my dad went, no, I'm fine with this. And he called me and told me that. And I love that story, not because I get to clap loud in the morning, but because here's something that vets have been doing for years, and they had this new technology. My father was so excited for it, and it really didn't fit at all. Here's this new technique, here's this new idea, but the thing that had been invented years ago and was the most low-tech or the earliest version of something worked perfectly. And the moral of the story is, no one's going to shout it out. Okay, first time no one's ever shouted it out. The idea, sing along if you know one. It was that idea of you can learn something, an old technique, and it still stays true. Even as the technology changes, as things around you change, what you know and what you've learned doesn't necessarily have to shift and change to go with it. The idea that the techniques you learn early and the techniques that you love and you can work really well with don't necessarily have to change because other technologies have changed or because of the fact that there's been a shift in how we work. But the actual reason I'm here is to talk about email. I was involved in an email chain a long time ago when I worked for a rather large company. And it started between myself and the developers asking about a problem. And the problem had multiple solutions. We could fix this way or this way. And that classic question that often comes up from a partner that says, what's the best way to do this? And my answer originally was, there's not necessarily a best way, but here's what we could do. We could try this method, or this method. And what instantly happened was, well, there has to be a best way. There has to be a perfect way to do it. And suddenly the email chain exploded. And what started between developers in the US and India spread to the West Coast. Suddenly executives started getting involved. Suddenly a VP of development was involved. A VP of design was involved. Somehow catering got on the email. I don't know how this happened. But a simple question turned into this incredibly long, detailed chain that, when it says forward, and you can't even see what the email started as. And finally, someone high up, an EVP, I'm not even sure what it was, I think it was like SV **** VP, said, okay, there has to be a rule for this. Why are we discussing this? There has to be a rule. And what blew my mind was, it's like everyone was looking for an excuse, a reason, something to justify a course of action. And I had asked partners to choose. I said, we could choose how we want to do this. But everyone was looking for a rule, some specific concrete judgment they could use. And I took 10 minutes. I spent 5 researching one approach. I spent 5 researching the other. I said, I feel like we've come down to a path of 2 options here, and I have a Forrester white paper for one and a Forrester white paper for the other. I have 3 blog posts here. I have 2 blog posts here. There is no right answer. There's nothing here that you can say, this is the absolute way to go. It's not like, 2 parts milk, 1 part chocolate, that sort of thing. And it was kind of fascinating to me because I realized how many times in my career I had been searching for something because someone wanted that concrete proof, that concrete answer. And it was that idea of everything keeps changing. How do you make your own decisions? Or how do I even decide what I think my rules are? So I had this challenge. Depending on how long you have been designing, researching, developing, whatever you do, at some point in time, you've probably hit that answer when someone says, well, how should we do this? And it's always, it depends. Right? It depends is the famous fallback for a lot of UX questions because you need to understand context. You need to understand the audience. You need to understand all of the things that go into the question and into the problem before you can define the answer. But at some point in time, it depends doesn't really help you out when you're working with your partners and your teams. That when someone says, we need to do something, and you say, it depends, you see that little trickle of smoke coming out the side of the ear? Not a full-blown blow-up, but you can sense that everyone's going, no, they're not listening to me anymore. So I thought, I don't want to say it depends anymore. I want to sit down and think about how I work. And this is how I used to work. I used to work in a startup where, if you can make it out, I still use Dreamweaver. I still had a monitor that weighed 60, 70 pounds, right? One of those things where when you moved cubes, you had someone come in with a back brace and a dolly because you weren't moving that thing yourself. Surprisingly enough, right behind the coffee, there's vitamins. And I think right behind the vitamins that you can't see is probably a jar of Nutella, balance and all things. And I started to struggle with, I felt like I had a really solid handle on what I knew back then. I'm not sure if you can see it in this one, but I think I have a copy of Jacob Nielsen's usability book under there. And there weren't as many books about design, UX, usability, all the things that we call modern UX were still taking shape. So it was kind of cool because you had to make up a lot of stuff as you went along, but it also meant that the rules weren't as codified and that you didn't get as many every question was weird. Like, there's no such thing as a weird question when no one's ever done it before. So I started to ask myself, what happened between then, besides the increase in technology and ergonomics, that had changed and suddenly there were all these different little rules and all these little different bullet points that you see when people talk about how to design or how to do UX, which is my favorite line, just UX it. Can't you just do the UX? We pay you enough money, just do the UX. One of the challenges is that we're constantly taking in information. And I'm going to be blunt here. This is a big disclaimer. I use we a lot in this talk. I'm not talking about everyone. We're all different. We all do super cool things that are different than everyone else. When I use the general we, it's because it's not quite the royal we, because that's just kind of funny to say. But it's that sense of we is when we talk about how we design, we love listicles, right? You see lists all the time. Top 5 ways to make sure your wireframes aren't bad. 15 ways to build a prototype that will win you an award. 7 ways to do a usability research project that won't make you lose your mind. As long as there's a number, like plus or minus 3, and then you keep going. There's also that question of best practices. How do I put this carefully? Nothing makes my brain seize up faster than someone who says, well, the best practice is ... I hear the word best practice and my brain shuts down and I just go, rrr, rrr. And usually about 30 seconds I wake up and someone's made a decision that I'm really going to regret. Because best practices sound fantastic, they sound great in a white paper, but think of all the best practices in the last 10, 15 years. We've had all these rules to build by, all these ideas. The idea of the 3-click rule, which, man, that's been blown out of the water. One of my favorites, the rule of 7, plus or minus 2. There was a 1% rule of content, which was kind of fun. Fitts Law from way back in the day. A favorite of mine that an art professor once emailed me a paper about when he realized that I'd become a designer. Look at it, it's called The Principle of Pictorial Realism, which sounds incredibly, incredibly cool, but it's still not very useful. Moment of silence for skeuomorphism. We loved it, didn't we? We loved it. And then, I'm not sure if anyone really remembers because it feels like it came and went. Remember when everything on the web was going to be personalized? Every homepage ever. There was no such thing as static content. Everything was going to be personalized for the moment you need it. And then people realized no one needed it. So all of these things that popped up as here's the best way to do it, here's a best practice, here's an approach, they've all faded with time. And there's a very good reason for that. Here's my favorite. Anytime you get in a discussion on Twitter and you put an opinion forward, there's always that one person who comes rushing in. You can almost sort of see them hopping out of the bathroom, pulling up the pens, going, do you have a citation, please? I need to see a paper. I'm going to need to see some proof. I love this idea, but I need a paper. 2 or 3 papers, multiple references. If you can make it academic, that'd be great. I don't need Medium links. I need something. If Jacob Nielsen said it, did Jared Spool say it? Lou Rosenfeld, anyone? And we wonder why Twitter can be problematic. And I think it was Robin Hitchcock who said, just the interesting and beautiful, please. We just, give us the cool stuff. No one really wants to dig around in the details. We all have work to do. If we're lucky, we have time to research. If we're lucky, we have time to document. But I think of all the projects I've done in my life where I had 50 hours to build something, and I had 1 hour to research it. And that 1 hour I had to carve out, like just carve it and claw it back out of the 50 hours. So we have all of these ideas. We have all of these forces pushing and pulling at what we know and what we do and how we design. And the trick is, we all want the fluff. I love this slide, but I realize it's probably going to fall like a lead balloon here because marshmallow fluff is such a New England food. I actually don't know if you can call marshmallow fluff food. A food stuff, a food-like product. It's basically marshmallows melted down, more sugar added. Think, if you can believe it, it's like Nutella with nothing organic in it. And it is the best stuff in the world. Believe me, I know. When we talk to our partners, when we're doing a project, when we have a client ask us lots of questions, they want the top line. How many times, I've lost track of how many times, I start to go through your research and there's usually that one executive who goes, hey, could you top line it for me? And in the back of your head, you're going, oh, top line something. Sure, I'd be happy to give you the bullet points. I made 30 slides, but here, you can have 2. Because the truth is, no one wants to see how the sausage gets made. If we're lucky, we get to share that. If we're lucky, maybe, if there's time to decompress after a project, you can do a write-up. If you're really lucky, maybe you can do a bit of a white paper or case study. And to this point, for everyone here, the work you do, the stuff that goes into making a great project, make great case studies, and they kind of make great talks. So next year, one of you up here, that'd be kind of cool. So now I'm hungry. That's the problem. So design, UX, start from where, end where. It's this, I'm not going to say I had a breakdown because I think I have a little breakdown every day. That's just how I operate. Irish Catholic, thank you very much. But it was a problem because it got harder and harder to tell people who approach me about, I want to go into UX and I want to learn what the rules are. I want to understand how to get started. And I didn't have a good answer for them. It got harder and harder to even explain sometimes to a client what I did in detail. So my answer, beyond heading to the bar, which you will see lots of proof of later, was to step back and to take a serious personal inventory and ask myself some questions that seem really fluffy at first, but they start to turn into something very cool. What do I know? Simple enough, right? Sort of question you wake up every day. What do I know? And then someone says, what do you want for coffee? And then you go, I don't know. Sit down and start looking back at what I'd done. Look at the projects, look at the people, look at the methods I'd learned, look at the things that made me a designer for better or for worse, and try to understand an inventory of my own skills. Sometimes we only do this when we're job hunting. How many times have you worked on a resume when you're comfortable in your job, right? Very rarely. It's often at the end when suddenly, oh crap, I have to look for a job. Suddenly I have to detail my skills. I have to talk about what I know. And it's kind of a shame because oftentimes we only do it when we're totally stressed and we're trying to look for a gig. And then as I was going through all the stuff I learned, my wife, who I love very, very much, casually walked by and said, yeah, but how do you know it? And I went, yeah. But it was a great point because she mentioned something that I've really taken for granted over the years, and that is, I started out with very few books about design, and now I have bookcases full of them. What are the things that set me on the path? Some of these are still actually a few newer ones, but you look back, that's the original Polar Bear book, Jesse James Garrett's book on user experience, the stuff that gave me a formulative idea of what I was doing. And then, as I think you'll hear later on when talking about things like accessibility specifically, everything's changed. The devices have changed. The contexts have changed. The tools have changed. So how much of what I started with and how much of what I knew was I still comfortable with? Lots of stuff I originally learned when we were dealing with standard size screens and certain dial-up speeds. Oh God, dial-up. I just depressed myself when I said dial-up. How much of this is a crapshoot anymore, right? Just roll a D20 and hope for the best sometimes. I know there's at least one geek out there who got it. That's the laugh I was looking for, thank you. And it came down to a really intense conversation around what I needed to rethink. And with all of the stuff that's out there, sit down, take a little bit of that personal inventory and go even further. This is how I learned to do testing. This is how I learned to do usability testing, and it came from these ideas and these methods. Holy crap, all those contexts have changed. I need to relearn some of what I've done. Here's what I learned about doing interviews and doing contextual research and ethnography. Well, people have changed a lot, but doing research and interviews hasn't changed all that much. I'm okay with some of that stuff. Information architecture. For better or for worse, a lot of the principles of information architecture are still solid. And then interaction design. Oh my God, everything's changing every 5 minutes, so it's kind of cool, but it's one of those, make a circle, make another circle, cross it out. I only referenced the Necronomicon 2 or 3 times. It really didn't get that bad. So I started digging into all of these newer books. Books that some old, some new, some that fit into it. When you think about it, depending on when you started working in this field, Jacob Nielsen's books were the Bibles. And everything about those books are incredibly dated. Keep it down back there. I'm expecting a pie any minute now. There's that idea of everything you might have learned from a book like that totally fades away as technology has changed. The things that were foundational don't work. Old inspiration. Most of it's still good. Even older books. The stuff that gave me the ideas of where I came from, and the science fiction, and all the other little things. And I love this photo because when I stand here, to you it looks wonderful. When I stand down here, it's like I just see the future stretching out beyond me. And it really made me think about how I design. And that sense of what is my process. I found this slide from 2008 when someone had asked me, how do you work as a designer, as UX? We were still, at that particular job, we were still discussing whether or not interaction design was a thing or UX was a thing. I was actually, I think at the time, still considered an information architect. And clearly I really wasn't that good at drawing because I tried to do a circle and you can see how badly that ended up. One of the things it's important to know your limitations. Even my stick figures look fat. So it was kind of fascinating to think about, research and strategy. And what kind of broke my heart was, holy crap, requirements were still a huge part of my process. I didn't really do anything until I got requirements from whether it was a product manager who really wasn't product back then. It was like site producers or marketing executives. And I didn't even start. And I think I did this specifically because I said, my work doesn't begin until I understand what I'm building. And how many times, like I said, a project comes along and you don't even get one of those 3 things, let alone all 3. And then all this stuff that just happens. It's like, task analysis, wireframes, guiding principles, best practices. I actually put best practices on a slide about how I design my work. If that isn't self-loathing at its finest, I don't know what is. And of course, Silver Herradura tequila. It's like nectar of the gods. I highly recommend it. I don't know how I've designed with anything I do. I don't know how to design without it. So this process actually is still kind of intact in some ways. The things are all there. And then I went back and I realized I made another one in 2010 for teammates I had back then. And I love this because it's still all there. And it was kind of scary that in 2010, the principles of what I thought design were still intact. It's kind of funny because banners don't necessarily exist the way they did before, but advertising units. Right? If you swap out banners for advertising units, it's still there. These are still the things we work with every day and we still get challenges with, right? Although you have to admit, be contextual is pretty open-ended, right? I'm not even sure what contextual is, but it seems really good on the slide. From that inventory, from that process, came this idea and turned into what I called, ladies and gentlemen, we have title, rules, hunches, and coin flips. That idea of all the things I've learned, I started making buckets. And I started to figure out, wait a minute, oh, this is a rule. This is something I know, something I believe in, something I don't bother with. I tell a partner or a client or I do it in my work, and if someone asks why, it's like, no, this isn't even up for discussion. This isn't up for grabs. These are cocktails I know how to make, right? You want a daiquiri, you make a daiquiri. You want a margarita, you make a margarita. Don't mess around with it. These are tried and true classics. Then there were the hunches, things that I might not have done in a while, but I'm pretty sure how to get there. It's a dash of this and a dash of that. When I'm building a large catalog, I know how to do information architecture and taxonomy, but as you start to break information up into smaller and smaller chunks, information architecture changes and the need for it changes, so you need smaller bits and bits. So you have to change what you do a little bit. And now as we move into product design becoming so much more intertwined with UX and design, you think more about marketing goals, business goals, product goals. Things that all tie into, I think, design in a way that has existed for quite a long time, but we're shifting the focus a little bit, so let's give it a dash of this, a dash of that. And my favorite, coin flips. For me, coin flips are that 50-50 thing. It essentially came down to me sitting at the bar one day and talking to my favorite bartender, Joe Camerata, a hero among men. And I said, I think I like rum. I know I like rum, but I don't know what type of rum I like. And he said, we are going to figure out today what rum you like the best. Light rum, dark rum, plantation, Bacardi, privateer, you name it. Longest, best day of my life. But it came down to, let's test it. If it's something that we're not really sure of, before we take action, we have this ability. That's a really weird way to say it. One of the coolest things about the last couple of years, I think, is this explosion of better testing tools, better ways to reach out to customers, to human beings, sometimes even to machine test. I mean, AI machine testing, that's just going to get crazy. We can test now in ways we didn't before, and I feel like design has become so much more open to, let's test it. There's no reason to just push something out and say it's perfect. We can adapt, we can learn. In the States, I feel like the biggest positive from all of the startups on the West Coast is they've opened up their doors and said, here's how we build our products, here's how we've tested, right? Most startups have at some point in time learned to launch a blog, and they're sharing more and more and more. So you can learn from that. You can learn from, oh, here's how you test in this context. Here's how here's how we went from beyond A and B. We did really deep contextual testing. And if you're really lucky, they'll even share some of how they've done the ethnography of who uses what and why. So it's not easy, but it's worth doing all of this and taking that inventory and setting down the things things you know, things you don't know, not just for personal development, but for professional goals, and to figure out, what do you want to do next? What do you want to do that? And again, why is this even important? So when I first started this project, I sat down and I did a first talk, and I did it for some friends, and a friend of mine was just super awesome as critique. He said, I love this story. Why does this matter? And I went, that's a great question. Why does it matter? Well, if you were going to take a photo of something I say today, this is the big boy. In the time it takes me to give this talk, there are going to be 4 new manifestos published to Medium telling you why design has changed and will never, ever, ever be the same again. And there's that sense of, wait a minute, every time I look around, someone's saying to me, it's all different. Everything's changed. I'm sorry, you have to start all over again. Like, I just bought like $400 worth of books. I don't want to start over. We are sharing stories better than ever before. Like I said, you have startups sharing all their information. Medium is fascinating, and as a blogging platform, it used to be, I'm sorry, half of this is just a little bit of an old man thing. I had RSS readers and I went to blogs, and you had to dig for it, and if you found a really good blog, you loved it, and you didn't tell anyone else about it because you wanted to be the only one who read it. And now on Medium, someone publishes something, and in the time it takes to hit publish, 15 people have liked it and said, awesome story, I want to see more of this, oh, fantastic. It's like, it's only been up for 30 seconds. It takes 6 minutes to read. How did you comment? And I came up with this idea because why it's important for me also is mentoring. As I started talking to people who want to do more in design and maybe want to change careers or move into design or move up in design, look, ignorance of the opinions of others is no vice. We are drowning in opinions. Someone asked a great question on Twitter, are we drowning in, didn't say drowning. It's like, do we have an excess of insights? And what I generally say is, I don't think we have an excess of insights, but we are drowning in opinions. We are drowning in data with no context. Depending on how much time you have to spend on the net and to spend reading stuff, you can spend your entire day going down a rabbit hole. If you're ADD like me, you start something in the morning and then you look up and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you go, what have I done with my life? That's medium in general. Medium should be medium. What have you done with your life? But that sense of, we've lost some of the guideposts and the sort of fences, and we don't have any real big names. I mean, there's lots of folks doing design, and there's lots of folks to listen to, but the guidance is sort of lost. So I had to make sure, this is my localization bit, Family Feud. I grew up with Family Feud. It's Family Fortune over here. Richard Dawson, the host of Family Feud, I spent more time with him than my parents for a couple of years. Like, I miss him more than some dead relatives, let's put it that way. And there's that idea of, we asked 100 people, top 7 answers on the board, name something you bring to a picnic, which is I don't actually know the question they asked, because if you bring iodine to a picnic, you're really planning ahead. We don't have that group consensus. We don't have that way to sort of come together on ideas, because designers, we're busy, we're spending time. Like, this is one of the few times we all get to come together, and if we all had to take a quiz and put our opinions in the middle, we could probably agree on a few things, and most of it would be about what bar to go afterwards for a drink. But we have all of these questions that I don't want to say haunt. I live in an old church, so I use haunt a little too much, I've realized, in the past couple of years. It's like, haunt, 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 haunt. Yes, you live in a church, we get it. But we have all of these conundrums in design that I still encounter every day, every week. I don't know if you do as well, but let's look at this. It's important to know your process, because, I don't know if you've heard this one, user experience is everyone's job, except when it's the job of specialists. And each of these comes from well-documented articles and opinions I found online. And that idea of any opinion you can find online about design, in 10 minutes you can probably find the equal or opposite opinion. So when a client comes to me and says, hey, I was thinking about hiring some UX people, but then I learned that it's everyone's job, so I'm going to make all my people do UX. I can just hear the groans in the background, right? And I think someone I spoke to last night said, well, yeah, we don't necessarily have UX people because everyone contributes to it, but we still need that moment where someone says, well, who's in charge of it? And then there's that sense of, I've worked with companies who said, we think we need to embrace UX and we want to hire specialists. They're both fantastic and they both make sense, but depending on how you come to it, you're going to find someone who can whack it down in a minute. Another one of mine, favorites, mobile first, except when there's no such thing as mobile. Right? This was a huge one that I loved watching unfold on Twitter. Right? Mobile first, mobile first, mobile first. I'm sorry, there's no such thing as mobile. I have to write an RFP. Will someone please pick a decision? The idea that mobile doesn't necessarily exist anymore because it's changed, the context has changed completely. We've got so many different devices, so many different approaches. But I got to tell you this, the glow I see on your faces, besides the healthy, happy glow that you're at NUX5, thank you, the glow I see is a lot of phones, right? That flash I see is a phone, unless it's a muzzle load. Never mind. So mobile is there, but when you say there's no such thing as mobile, they are right. So you have to sort of be able to say, but for the work we're doing, let's go down this path. Let's not open the whole thing up for discussion. Speaking of guessing, this is my favorite. It's wrong to guess. You should always have data. You should always move forward with something very clear and very consistent, except when we value constraints. We launch when we launch, right? That sense of we have 30 days to do the work. Agile's like that. You have 14 days. I can barely get through 14 days making a simple decision in my life. I can't imagine making it in business, right? I suck at Agile. There, I said it, right? Agile for me is just sort of 14 days of crap. And it's stressful for design because it's great when you can all agree that if we only have 14 days to solve a problem, then we obviously won't solve it completely, but we'll make progress. But tons of time when you're working in an Agile environment, you still have someone who stands up and says, okay, well, you're going to solve this, right? This will be done. You have 14 days to solve why people will not go through a 14-step logout process, checkout process on their phone while they're on the train and while they have music playing. And by the way, we have to make sure we know where they are so that the ticket they order is for the venue that's closest to them at the time of ticket of purchase. Why do I drink? This is where I see the most fun between this, what I love about startup culture, the idea of like, plan like each release is your last, right? You may never launch your thing again. You get one shot, and it never may happen. I had like 2 coffees. I think I should have had 4. The idea of each release is the only one you might ever get out the door. So make sure you're totally happy with it and it's perfect in your eyes. Versus, again, agile, rolling development. We're going to have iteration and flexibility. Like, I worked for a company where they put out a release 24 hours, 48 hours. Whenever they got something meaningful, they put it out the door. So obviously, things go out the door where you're happy with it, but there are things that are lagging, right? I've never hit launch on a release where everything was perfect. It just doesn't happen that way. Like, you notice the release notes in an app, and it'll say, we made these changes, and the release notes internally are like, these are all the things we have to test, right? We think it works, but these are the ways it's going to break, and we're going to watch really closely in the next 72 hours. When a client asks you, or when your partner says, when product says, how are we going to do this? You have to pick a direction. You can't just sit there and spin. Another great one, prototypes rule. We're in a great, we have Acture as a sponsor. Thank you very much. Love Acture. Has made prototyping so much more powerful, right? There's that line, a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings, which I firmly believe. But by the same token, I've never been to 1,000 meetings on one project in my life, so I'm not sure how much that works. But I've done work for a company that I loved, and when we started the project, he sat down, the head of development said, so here's the thing. You're going to do some prototypes. I said, absolutely. It's great. We'll probably learn stuff. I'll have to spend less and less time explaining, like we won't have to read. We can react. My developers like to react. My developers don't like to read. What are you going to build it in? I said, we'll probably use some CSS. If you have anything, we're going to keep it simple. We might use Bootstrap. We'll make sure that all the interactions are there. He said, I love it, but let me tell you something right now. Unless your code has been stress tested in my environment, unless my QA people have approved it, anything you build, it'll never go any further than your desktop. Unless you can produce production-level code, everything you do is a waste of time. So let me ask you this. How do you feel about pen and paper? And I'm not going to lie, I hugged that man. And I might have held the hug a little longer than he was comfortable with. So I worked in pencil and paper for the next 3 or 4 weeks, and I was the happiest I've been in a long, long time. It says a lot about me, not about him. And it was fantastic because that idea of how many times do you work in an environment where someone says, all we do, we produce prototypes. We don't like people to have to spend too much time reading. We don't like producing long requirements documents. If you can describe it, why not build it? Especially because there are dozens of tools now that let you put something together so fast. But again, how much time are you spending on something? And unless you're going to roll it into a true production environment, it's all going by the wayside anyway. So prototypes, yes. Prototypes, no. Flip your coin, ask some questions, go have a drink. Another reason I think you need to have a good sense of what you want to do and how your design process goes, because information needs organizing, right? That sense of you can't just put information out there and let people figure it out, except when there's that case of this is a great quote from a client who said, well, I don't want to put information out there because imposing structure is a crime. And I went, wow, break that down for me. And he said, well, remember, we're going to use like a folksonomy. And I had this moment of, folksonomy. Holy crap. Does anyone here remember folksonomies? It's great. It's fantastic. We were going to let the web sort itself out. Like hashtags were essentially supposed to create that. And what a fustercluck hashtags have become. I mean, Flickr was going to be awesome. People would tag stuff. They'd say duck, park, Britain, Bill, drowsy. And no one did it. So what's the point of building all this open system if you've got no one to do it? Like the dream of the early 2000s was the users would generate every bit of content ever needed. And holy crap, if every piece of content generated was so freaking useless, you had to rebuild it again anyways. Another big one. Patterns support design. depending on where you are in your work cycle and where you are at your company, you might have a pattern library, right? You might be using templates, because when you're working on a big site, I think at an event apart, I think it's Brad Frost, he was looking at United Airlines and he found 18 examples of buttons on United Airlines site. Look, United site's a disaster and a half anyways, but 18 buttons, I can't even imagine 18 buttons. My brain can only go, okay, square around, square around, square around. Why am I doing this? Why am I crushing your head? I'm crushing your head, I'm crushing your head. But that sense of, patterns, and it's kind of infamous because how many sites today are basically 3 levels, one broad section, and then maybe a carousel, and then maybe it breaks into 2 and breaks into 3. You have the pyramid, and you have the Neapolitan with the 3 big sections. So you have patterns. It makes it easy to turn out a site really quickly, which sometimes is what a project needs. Sometimes you just need to roll something out and get people to react to it. But then at the same point in time, when everything is a pattern, and if it's a template, it looks like crap, right? We can make fun of it now. You can look at something and go, Bootstrap 3.0, and I see you've chosen a fine template. Only 2 years old, has that nice shade around the edge, carousel, muy bueno. So when a client comes to me and says, so we think we want to start with a site, and we think we have this pattern library we want to use, I go, maybe let's just sketch something for fun. Let's just see if we can come up with something. This is my favorite. If you're an independent, I don't know if any of you have heard this one, which is, people want your expertise. I've been doing this for almost 20 years now, and it's amazing and freaks me out every day, but it also makes people seek me out, and they say, you've been doing this for 20 years, you must have some idea of what you're doing. And then, lately, I've had this really interesting approach from a client who said, we love what you do, we want you to come to this project with a beginner's mind. We don't want you to think about anything you've done before. We want you to completely open yourself up to the possibilities of what this project can do. And then I looked at the proposal and I went, oh, you don't want beginner's mind, you want a beginner's rate. I totally see where you're going here. I totally get it. So these are the problems that vexed me, and why I think we need to do this, because when you come up with all of these different challenges, who gets to decide? Right? We don't have the benefit of Richard Dawson anymore. We don't have one common source of knowledge that we can all agree on. And again, I think I miss him more than my grandfather. But there's that sense of we're living in an amazing space where we have so much information, we have so much to draw from. I like to talk about, big data has come along, but what I'm really scared to death of is that big data doesn't translate to big wisdom. It translates to hundreds of data points that you can't correlate until you take the time to sit down and map them out for what it means to you. And so while you're thinking about this through the rest of the day, and when you get home, when you think about this, just take a minute and ask yourself, what are your rules? What are your hunches? What are your coin flips? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Boon. So we've got a couple of questions.
Awesome.
The shortest one was from Gareth Starkey, and he asked, which rum won?
Which what?
Which rum won?
Which room?
Rum.
Oh, which rum? Oh, certainly.
It's that really bad Geordie accent.
Oh, God. The funny thing is I love so many British bands, but they all sing with often American tones, and so I'm muddle that. The rum that won was a Privateer Silver rum, which is made outside of Boston. So that's kind of a cheat because it's local. Barbados Plantation Rum, 5-year, can't go wrong. Can't go wrong.
I could have kept that joke going on for ages. What's the most interesting thing you've worked on and why?
Oh, geez. Pass. No, I think some of the most interesting things I've worked on were industries I had no knowledge of. So I did a project for an insurance company, and this is going to sound weird because insurance, you sort of know it. The challenge they had was around people who remove someone from their insurance. And it was fascinating because I don't know if this has affected any of you yet, but Most of the time when you remove someone from your insurance, there's two common scenarios. The most common scenario is I have a child, and that child is now old enough to get their own insurance. But unfortunately, the other common reason to remove someone from your insurance is you have been divorced or that person has passed on. And it blew my mind to learn that what this business problem was all about humanity in a totally different way. They were saying, people won't fill out this form. They're failing at this form. The truth was, people were starting to it had been months since someone had passed on, and they were starting to go through the process, and the emotion was too strong. They couldn't deal with it. And they preferred to talk to a person and get someone on the phone. And so it was that sense of, the web can never satisfy this. It's such a specific scenario. And it's colored a lot of work I do since. When you get close to something, I think Sarah Watcher was here last year, and it's something that she talked, and Eric Meyer talked about as well. And it was right in the face, and it blew my mind.
What is something that you'd love to work on, but haven't?
I'm torn because Pokemon Go became a huge part of my life earlier this year. Do you put has someone Googled my name? My house became a Pokemon Go gym when the game launched. I live in an old church, again, built in the 1800s, and it was marked as a gym. So I woke up Saturday morning after the game had launched and looked out my front window to see 15 people in front of my house just all staring at my house like this. And it's that look that people give when they're looking at you, but they're doing it through the phone, and it was so unsettling. It was like Children of the Corn or something like that. And I pulled out the game and went, holy crap, my house is a gym. And it blew my mind. It immediately immersed me in what augmented reality means. And so I did a deep dive into augmented reality. I haven't worked on one of those, but I'd love to, because I think it opens up a set of design challenges that we haven't really thought of yet. Augmented reality and layering is something that I think would be super cool, especially because I feel like I'm a living edge case, so I want to bring that knowledge to a project like that.
Is your house still a gym?
My house is not a gym. The people at Niantic were very nice. I waited about a week, and then I asked them to remove it, and they were I think it took 24 hours, and it was perfect, and I know it worked because it happened at midnight, and someone told me that they were there at the gym battling at 11:58, 11:59, and then suddenly, poof, the gym disappeared, and he went, no! But yeah, my house is no longer a gym, and we're much happier that way.
Thank you very much, Boon. Give him a round of applause.
Thanks, everybody.